Is the problem getting worse by the minute? I think so. But someone who deals with this every day joins me right now, Steve Maggi. He's the immigration attorney with SMA Group. And Steve, it seems like even the whole due process of this thing is now going out the window if they're not giving people a notice to appear.
Yeah, I think that that's not really correct. I think that it's important for people to understand something is that because of COVID and previous Trump changes under the Trump administration, there were 75,000 people that were waiting in these camps outside the border to enter the US that were hoping to apply for asylum. And they were waiting all of last year, essentially, from March going forward. So those are the people that have now come to try to apply for asylum. So it's not that there's a wave that came out of nowhere and then they were waiting, to come in. This is really something that happened as a byproduct of that. So those are the people that are now coming in to try to apply for asylum. The other thing that has not changed is this what's called credible fear interview. So it's a misnomer, it's a misconception that people can say, I want to apply for asylum, and then they get handed a notice to appear 2 years later, or they don't, and they get released. They have to pass a credible fear interview first. And if the officer thinks that there's there's a likely chance that they could get asylum, they could qualify, that's when they're given an opportunity to go to court. Otherwise, they get what's called expedited remove. They actually get removed from the US. And that's still the process that's in place. That was in place since 2004 until now. So I don't think this is necessarily the case. We're just talking about a system that's backlogged. There's more than 1 million people in the immigration court system. And because the courts were closed all this time because of COVID, there would have been a backlog, whether it was Trump that was president or Biden. So this is just, unfortunately, the administration has inherited this problem.
Okay. I like your insight, but to try to in any way frame this as Trump causing this problem to me is a stretch. But I wonder this. We saw these caravans coming, right? And they were saying these people are coming from Honduras and here and there. If you pass through another country like Mexico to come to the United States, right? Well, isn't the credible fear argument gone once you left a country and passed through another country? Why don't you ask them for asylum? Why are you going to the U.S.?
Yeah, and that's what the previous president's feeling was on this, his rationale. And actually, he passed something through executive action that would require people to apply for asylum in those third countries before they apply for asylum in the U.S. The problem is that that wasn't constitutional because you can't force other countries to accept asylum requests. But that's why President Biden now is trying to invest money into those countries of origin like Honduras and El Salvador and work with those countries to see if they can apply for asylum first elsewhere before they do it in the US. And that's not something that's going to change overnight because that requires that other countries change their asylum laws, including Mexico. And I'm sure Mexico wants to wash their hands of it and doesn't want those people to apply for asylum in Mexico either. So we're talking about 4 or 5 different countries here. It's very complicated. I see your argument completely, but it depends on those other countries for them to change the way that they do it as well. And that's why President Biden is saying, why don't we give you $4 or $5 billion per year to these countries to build that system, so then they maybe don't have to apply for asylum in the U.S. And that could take several years, I think.
Understood. So you don't think there's any validity, despite numerous news reports that they're so overloaded at the border that people are being released into the country without a date to a court date? You don't think that's happening?
I definitely think they're overloaded. There's no denying the numbers. Like I said, a lot of them are spillover, and it's not President Trump's fault that those people were waiting because of COVID. He said, we don't want you to process this now. But I think that there's a couple of different factors here that are involved. I think it's not so cut and dry.
Okay. What percentage of asylum claims do you think are actually validated and approved?
I would guess somewhere between 10 and 15%. And so you have to understand if they pass what's called this credible fear interview, then their chances are much higher. There's 350,000 people right now in the US who have passed that first test and are waiting. I don't think they're going to just let anybody pass that test. It has to be a very strong case from the outset. But
Understood.
yeah.
I was the other night fortunate enough to get invited to some folks and do a little talk in the Turkmenistan community. They live here in Queens, but these people from these former Soviet countries, right? And all of these people in the Bukhari community, real faithful Jewish folks, and they were talking. You would think that people who are immigrants would be like, let everybody in. But the sense I was getting from them was that they want to let everybody in, but they came here illegally and they had to go through a long process where they had established where they were going to live, how they were going to make money, and they had references and stuff, I guess when they did it way back. To me, it feels like most of the people who are legal immigrants to the US want everyone to come, but the same process they had to go through.
Yeah, but I've also noticed with recent immigrants that they also try to be exclusionary. Once they're on the inside, they're much more against new immigrants coming in. It's not what you would have expected, actually, right? You would expect them to empathize. I would say with those people who are from the former Soviet republics, who are different ethnicities, who are persecuted, the same with the Western provinces of China, those people are persecuted because they're not of the majority race. And so a lot of them probably from that community that you were speaking to, a lot of them probably were asylees or their family members of asylees that were able to substantiate their claims. And a lot of people also fly in on planes, and when they get to that Customs and Border Protection booth where they have to, have that short interview, they'll say, I want to apply for asylum. It's not just happening over the borders, it's happening at every what's called point of entry around the US. So I think that it makes sense. If they pass that credible fear exam and then they got their asylum, of course they want everyone else to go through that same process and to pass that test. I would never advocate for fraud or for people who don't meet specific tests to be in the US, of course.
So, Steve, let me ask you this, and I just not even being devil's advocate, you're an attorney. So someone comes in to an attorney, and I've been reading about these, asylum application mills that are going, these law firms that are, basically recruiting people over the border. Come on in, we'll help you. When a person comes in and makes, a half-hearted asylum claim, right? Mm-hmm. The attorney, I know, attorneys enjoy this, great gray area where, every guilty person deserves representation, so you don't really ask. But the attorney at that point knows this person has entered the country illegally, right? Does the attorney run any risk of breaking ethical laws by filing a claim for someone who they know has already broken the law in the country?
Well, they're two separate things. So you're technically allowed to enter the United States illegally, and then you're put into something called defensive asylum. So you're put into the court system. That the fact that you entered illegally, if you really are fleeing persecution, is overlooked because you really need the asylum. Otherwise, you're at risk of losing your life to your home country. But any ethical lawyer will see if their clients are fabricating a case, they should not be taking that case. They should have nothing to do with it. They should say, good luck, but I'm not going to represent you. And unfortunately, there are thousands of attorneys who are willing to take any case and charge an obscene amount of money and knowingly present fraudulent or fabricated claims or even witnesses that don't exist. And those people that obviously I would have nothing to do with. Unfortunately, they also entice people to come to the US and promise them that they will be able to get asylum. And that's what clogs our court system with bad cases.